this conflict basically goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, which is primary, the ideal world or the physical material world. And it took Immanuel Kant, perhaps one of the greatest philosophers of all time, 18th century German philosopher, to reconcile the two. But let me show you how Kant reconciled these two views. So even though he was a philosopher, he was reading the works of Copernicus and of a Scottish philosopher named David Hume. And as he's reading their works, he said it was like something like woke up inside of his mind, and he got out of this very Aristotelian way of thinking. Aristotle is the one that gave us the syllogism and like formal logic. And basically what Aristotle said is something cannot be one thing and another thing simultaneously. Something is either right or it's wrong. It's black or it's white. It's high or it's low. It's male or it's female. And so you had this very sort of either or thinking going on in the West, which has been very helpful. There's a place for either or thinking. But what Kant realized was, do you guys remember what Copernicus's claim to fame was? He is the one that came up with the heliocentric view of the solar system. This idea that it was the sun at the center of the solar system, not the Earth, and that we were actually traveling around the sun, not the other way around. And people mocked him and all of that. And it wasn't until Galileo, with a telescope, saw a moon on the planet Jupiter that people began to take that idea seriously, at least in the West, because they're thinking, oh, well, if there's a moon orbiting around Jupiter, maybe everything isn't orbiting around us, because we really had this idea of a terracentric or earth-centric view, like we are the center and everything's moving around us, and now we're seeing something in space moving around something else. And so people began to think, oh my goodness, what if Copernicus is right? And so Kant was able, and I love, this is such a great, to me, is true education where you can integrate across disciplines. So he took that astronomic observation and he applied it back to this problem with Berkeley and Locke and Plato and Aristotle. And he says it doesn't have to be an either or, that the world is all in our head or the world's all happening outside, but both could be happening simultaneously. And just like we have a moon orbiting around us, but that doesn't mean we can't be orbiting around something else ourselves. Both could be happening at the same time. It's not like you're either orbited or you're orbiting. It could be both and. And so Kant brought that way of thinking where you don't just have the thesis and the antithesis, but you're also looking for a synthesis. So instead of an either or, you're looking at kind of a both and sort of mentality, which is a much more Eastern way of thinking. It's more inclusive, where either or is a very exclusive way of thinking. And so with that thinking, he said, there is a real physical material world out there, but we only can perceive the phenomena of the world. And that's a fancy word for, that's how the world appears to us as humans. We do not see the world as it actually is. That he called the numeral world, or the world as it is in and of itself. And even though Kant didn't say this, I'll say it. Only God knows the numeral world. We only know the world as we perceive it from our particular vantage point as human beings. And not only that, but particular human beings. So for example, if, well, this doesn't really work on Zoom, but I'll use the analogy because I haven't come up with a Zoom one yet. When I'm teaching in a classroom, I tell my students, if you were a classroom full of pit vipers, you would all be perceiving me out of holes in the sides of your heads, where you'd be picking up my heat signature, and that would be interpreted in your brain, and you would come up with an image, and you could distinguish my heat signature from every other person in the room. but you're not pit vipers, you're humans. So you're using your eyes and your ears and your nose to take in the information I'm giving you. Or if it was a bat classroom full of bats, you would be like chirping at me and I'd be chirping back at you, and we would be picking up sonar signals from each other, and we would be using that to interpret and understand the world. And so what Kant is saying is Locke is right in that there's a real world out there, but Berkeley is also right in that we are projecting, or we are ordering the world from our own heads. Wow. And I think Kant was right on the money with that one. It's not just illusion. It's not like Hinduism or just saying, it's all just a dream or whatever. There is a real physical material world with real physical cause and effects, but we're not seeing the world as it is. We're seeing it from our limited human perspectives, and we bring our vision of what reality is into the world we inhabit. And I think that's a great place to end tonight, as you kind of see that progression and how we get into this weird dualism. I want to show you one more chart while I'm thinking about the dualism. Okay, so you see that chart? So here we have Cartesian dualism. We have the physical and the mental world. Now, a physicalist like Hobbes or Locke would say, no, it's the physical world that's real. For the idealist, it's the mental or the world of the mind that is real. And then we get into someone like Kant, who is saying it's all real, okay? But there's also parts of the world we simply don't know or understand because we have a limited human way of perceiving the world. And that's okay. We just have to acknowledge that because we're humans, there's things that will be beyond our perspective. So next week, I'll plan on starting with the existential philosophers and show how they led to like Joseph Brouwer, Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud, and how that affected the field of psychology and psychiatry. And you'll see the same tensions, right, between different psychologists. You'll have the pure materialist that are thinking we need to treat what's broken with the body, or they have a broken brain. Or the idealists are saying, no, they have a broken mind, they have a broken soul or broken spirit. Well, that's what we need to treat. And then you have more like the Kantians saying, they could have a broken mind and a broken brain. And how can we work with both of those? And so I think that will be very helpful as we come into what we call the modern mind. And even though everything we talked about tonight with those philosophers was from like the 16th to 18th centuries, that's called modernism in philosophy. And so postmodernism started with Hegel, or you could even say it started with Kant in the 1800s. And our culture is just now catching up to it, which I think is amazing. But that's a lot where that existential philosophy will come in, I'll talk about next, and then we'll pivot into what I believe a Christian view of the self is.